welcome to another episode of the South African Spies podcast. Today is another episode in the Bramdo Bites segment, and today we are going to be talking about the talk, and that is puberty. So hello Mickey, and are you ready to get this conversation rolling?
Hello. It's probably the first time I'm talking about puberty.
Well, it's going to be a good one, because I think this is something that is just not spoken about enough. It's still an issue that it was back then, and I think it's probably one or two generations off before we get to a point where this is part of normal conversation. I am yet to find anybody in my circle, your circle, our circle, literally anybody that we know who can say to me, "Oh, I got the talk from my parents when it happened." So I'm pretty much going to go on the assumption that everybody I know was not given the talk and had to just figure out what was going on with themselves all on their own.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're going to go through our own experiences when we went through puberty and kind of just talk about that.
Let's remember what it was like 20 years ago. Okay, I broke you.
20 years ago.
You were 12.
Sure, that is one way to make me feel old. I told you I'm a young one. Okay, enough with the jokes. Let's get down to the serious business of puberty. Mickey, how did you know that you were going through puberty?
I don't think I realized I was going through puberty or was aware of it when it was happening, because being an Indian male, we're pretty hairy. And that meant I think I was 10 or 11 years old when I started getting my mustache in. So that kind of just was a thing. My voice was very deep from a young age as well. But because for a guy, there was no clear definition of what it means to start puberty. Like, it's not like you get your period and that's the time you know for sure you're starting puberty.
Yeah, for guys, it's more of a gradual process.
Yeah, but it's gradual, but also overnight, because your voice just cracks and all of a sudden you sound like you're sick.
Yeah, but I mean, like, just gradual in the sense that everything doesn't happen at the same time.
Yeah, correct. So for that reason, I wasn't aware of it, or I didn't know that it was puberty. I didn't know it was a thing. It just was changes. But I'm guessing for you as a woman, your experience was very different for when you started going through puberty. And how did that feel for you?
For me, I do wish it was gradual, but it wasn't. I remember it like it was yesterday, though. So one day I went to the toilet, there was blood in my underwear, and I'm grateful, though, that I didn't think I was dying, because when I speak to most girls, their initial thought when they saw that was that they were dying. I didn't have that thought. I knew what it was, but I kept quiet. I rolled some tissue, I stuffed it in there, and I kept going to the bathroom throughout the night. And then in the morning, I got up and I told my mother very calmly, and that was it.
So you being very OCD about being messy and stuff, how did that affect you? Because you were always very pedantic about being neat, and all of a sudden messing with blood. What was that like?
Yeah, horrific. For me, it was the equivalent of like a crime scene, but it wasn't that bad. I was freaked out more by the mess than I was by what was happening. And I immediately went, changed my underwear, rolled some tissue, kept it there, and like I said, just kept going to the bathroom to make sure there was no further mess or seeping through. Luckily, it wasn't an immediate heavy flow. So by the time the morning came and I told my mother, and she got me a pad and gave it to me and was just like, cool, put it on. I did that, and then everything was a little bit better. What I did struggle with, though, was not the mess or not anything else, but really just the understanding of what this means going forward. All that really happened when I got my period was my mother gave me a pad. Nobody told me how to put it on or showed me how to use it. I just remembered from, the few occasions I've ever seen my sister put a pad on her underwear. And I was like, I'm sure it goes like this, and I kind of figured it out by myself. And that was really it. I know that I was relieved that I got my period, because I got my period at the age of 12. It was the year I was turning 13. It was my first year of high school, but I considered myself late to coming of age, because when I was in grade 7, all the girls that were, in my class or part of like friend groups all had their periods.
But you were at school a year early.
I was. But still, like, you don't think that that's the reason. Then you kind of still put yourself at the same level as your peers.
Yeah.
And then you think, well, everybody's this age, or we all at this phase of life, so we're all supposed to get, our periods at the same time and have like breast development take place. And that really wasn't the case. There were 2 of us in my class that were flat-chested. I'm still waiting for that to change. Unfortunately, it's just not happening. I'm part of that community. But it never occurred to me that it happens at different ages, because they always tell you it's like from the time you're 13 till about 15. So you kind of have that expectation that it's gonna happen to you sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I get that. And do you actually remember what you told your mother? Like, how did you tell her that it happened?
I think I told her I'm bleeding. I'm pretty sure I said something like, I think I actually said I got my period.
Oh, so you actually said I got my period.
Yeah.
Or I think I got my period.
Yeah, I think I either said I'm bleeding there, or I've got my period. So there was little room for that awkwardness.
Yeah.
Where it did become awkward was when she was like, okay, you have to just make sure you're clean now. And then she got on the phone with absolutely every single person that she knew, including my uncles, and was like, oh, she's a big girl. And that was incredibly embarrassing, because here you are bleeding and, in pain and just uncomfortable. And your mother's on the phone literally telling the whole world something this intimate and private. But I'm pretty sure it's what every Indian mother did, because it's a part of like our culture to share that, because that coming of age for a woman is such an important part of your journey into womanhood.
Yeah, I kind of remember my sister when it happened for her, and everyone getting into the lounge and doing a big prayer and that whole thing. I don't remember much because we weren't allowed anywhere near it, and the Formula One was on as well, so I was watching.
So the big old prayer was part of that as well, and it is a big thing. I do remember also that day my mother said, okay, you're not going to school, you need to stay in the house and nobody must see you, but I never got an explanation as to why. She never explained to me, kind of why. And as I grew up and you hear more stories and you hear like when the aunties talk and stuff, then it kind of comes across as like, you have to just be sheltered away, because what it felt like was that you're dirty and there's something wrong with you, and that's why you need to be kept away. So that was very isolating for me. And then I couldn't understand this concept of being clean. Like my mother would say, just make sure that you're clean. And I was like, but I am clean. I shower correctly. Like I never understood what it meant, to be clean, especially at that time. But there was never a conversation of being clean means that yes, you're wearing a pad, but you need to change it regularly. You need to, if you feel like you have a heavy flow and you need to have an extra shower, just go and do that. But like keep that area clean and keep yourself comfortable and keep your pad changed. Keep changing your pad so that you aren't sitting with basically old blood. So that was also very confusing for me. And then the other thing that happened is my mother cracked the eggs and gave me to drink, which was horrible. For anybody who doesn't know what that means, and I know you don't know what that means.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what that means. So could you explain?
So, as an Indian girl, when you come of age, you need to basically drink raw egg. I still don't know if it's true, but it's said to help you with pain and help with the odor of that blood for your future periods, and really just give your body the protein and everything that it needs in that time that you're losing blood for the first time. Now, I never ate egg in general because it just makes me nauseous, and now my mother was giving it to me raw. Worst 3 days of my life. We had a fight every single morning. She would call me to the kitchen, she'd crack the egg in the cup, And then she'd say, drink this thing. And I'd cry and perform and fall on the floor and throw a big performance because I just didn't want to do it. And it ended up being that for the 3 days, she would put some milk, which I also don't drink, and then I added every single sweetener I could find. Cinnamon, honey, sugar, vanilla essence, everything. I added everything into that just to be able to drink it. And I drank it for 3 days, and then I was like, I'm done. I'm not drinking this anymore. And she agreed to that because she was going to make me drink it for 5. But I managed to get it down to 3, and we were pretty happy with that compromise. And that was also after that where I was like, I can't stay at home anymore. Like, I am going to school because I am bored out of my mind and I don't know what to do with myself.
So it was quite interesting to hear how this went down with your mother. Now, how did it go down with your sister? Because I'm sure you told her as well, right?
I think my mother told her, and she phoned and, she made sure I was like, okay, but also didn't really give me the talk because I don't think she knew what to say. Because nothing had been said to her either. So it was just like...
unprepared for it.
Yeah, so it was just like, okay, are you fine? Are you okay? And it's like, yeah, I'm cool, you cool, we're all cool. Everybody was cool, and then that was it. And then, we had to do my prayer, which we did very small, because I refused.
Do you remember what goes on in this prayer?
No.
No.
No, I don't.
I
don't remember at all.
I think I recall my sister getting gifts from...
Yes.
Yeah.
That I know you get. So your mother's brothers are supposed to gift you gold.
Okay.
I didn't get the gifts because I don't like gold.
Okay.
So I said no to the gifts. And then I had to get my mother to please stop telling every single person who phones the house phone that I'm sick. At that point, it starts getting embarrassing that everybody knows something that is happening with you that is actually so intimate.
Yeah.
And you don't even understand.
And also, you don't feel sick. And then everyone's being told you're sick.
Yeah, well, that was the other thing. And this was something you brought to my attention since we've been together. Is every time I'd have my period, I'd tell you, oh, I'm sick. And then you'd be like, oh, what's wrong? Do you have the flu? And I'd be like, no, I have my period. And you would say, you're not sick. You just have your period.
Yeah.
And so as of late, I've gotten out of the habit of kind of referring to myself as sick in that time because I'm not sick. I'm quite able, except for the one day I'm debilitated by pain.
Because you're over dramatic and it doesn't really hurt that much.
Oh. Wrong thing to say to a woman, my friend. Wrong thing. But no, because I am genuinely in pain for that day. And it's only like recently that I've stopped referring to myself as sick. And I've actually started looking at my period as not something that is wrong or dirty or embarrassing or anything of the sort. But from the time I had my period till very late on in my life, that's how I did look at it. Because it's something that's not spoken freely about. So it makes you feel like it's something you should be embarrassed about.
Yeah, I think that whole ordeal, because there's a trigger, it can be, well, I feel it can be a bit more traumatic for women because there's a trigger point for it. Whereas for some guys, it can just go under the radar and never noticed. And you can go through this whole thing without that embarrassment of everyone knowing. Like for me, no one ever made fun of my voice. I know we did it to your nephew, the youngest one, when it happened.
Yeah, it was funny though.
It was funny because we were also not in the same place as him, and I think we first heard it on a video call and was like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But for me, no one ever did anything for my voice. No one ever said anything besides don't shave too early because you'll regret it. And that was it. So I went through the whole puberty thing completely under the radar.
So does that mean that you did not get the puberty talk as well?
I definitely did not get the puberty talk. I was at a point caught with a magazine at school, which was not the most kosher magazine, especially going to a Jewish school. But yes, it was one of those magazines. And when my stepfather had picked me up from school, because my mother was definitely not picking me up from school that day because I got sent home, he kind of half gave me a talk. It was definitely not the talk because I think he was also, my stepfather was quite young and he was quite unprepared for the whole situation being, like I mentioned before, a gradual thing that happens to boys, it was just like, oh, we might have missed this point where we need to talk to him. And it was a very awkward car ride home.
Well, serves you right for taking naughty stuff to school. So, did you experience like wet dreams and everything else without actually understanding what was happening?
Yeah, I think so. Like, start having the wet dreams and being aroused and finding women attractive and stuff. And I don't think I ever stopped and realized, oh, this is what they must be talking about when they talk about puberty. It was just, it happened and it became part of life.
Did you ever try to find a way to try and understand why these things were happening? Like by speaking to people or anything of the sort?
I don't know if I actually sought out advice or any of that sort. My cousin, I remember, telling me a lot about what was going to happen to me or what he assumed would be happening to me. And he must have only been maybe 8 or 9 years older than me. But he would tell me what he thought at my age should be happening and stuff like that. And that was as much of a puberty talk that I got.
What about from school?
From school, it was weird because when my friends started discussing, I think a lot like you, where because I was a year younger than everyone, they went through things before me. So they would tell me about certain changes happening to their body. Like, I definitely remember one of the guys saying, oh yeah, his nipples are getting hard a lot of the time. And that's puberty. And for me, that never happened to me at that stage. And I was like, oh no, am I never going to have puberty? Like, what's wrong with me? Why is it not happening to me? And that was my kind of experience with dealing with my friends. I think it was also the same with when it came to your testicles dropping, and it happened to me without me noticing it happened. So when my friends were talking about it, I was in this, did it happen to me? Did it not happen to me? Is there something wrong with me kind of situation? So yeah, that was me, like with my experiences with friends. And I'm sure you had very different, because girls talk about things differently, right?
Yes and no. So, yes, like the girls were very open about, oh, I've got my period. But I think it was more a thing about being excited about it. My group of friends weren't embarrassed to say, oh, I've got my period, or, like show you that they're taking out a pad and or even a tampon and like running to the bathroom because they've got their period. It was actually something they would show off, especially when we were at a point where not many other girls were at that stage yet. As we got older, though, like in high school, girls would talk about, oh, I'm in so much pain, or it's that time of the month, and girls would be more open to telling you that they've got their period or talking about it when they needed you to do a spot check or stand behind them, or do you have an extra pad, or do you have a painkiller or something like that. But nobody really spoke about what was happening. And I think in high school, it was also because we got to a point where it's just like, oh, this is happening, it is what it is, and, everybody just kind of deals.
So at that age when you were going through this, did you have a lot of female friends that you could like speak to? Or because you were a tomboy, right? So you had a lot of male friends. So how was that puberty experience for you?
I actually think it was a bit better because I got a lot of sympathy from the boys.
Okay. Did they realize what was going on?
They knew that it was that time of the month. That's just what it was. Because I would, be in pain and I would be quiet. And, there was definitely a distinct change in my demeanor and my mood and stuff like that. So they noticed. They noticed those kind of things. So they were like a little nicer to me, and I'd get like extra like snacks and chocolates and whatever I wanted really, and carrying my bag for me, stuff like that. But that was the good side of it. The bad side was not having close female friends. I didn't have anybody who I felt comfortable to ask a question to or to say anything to. But what I did do from a young age was actually learn as much as I could myself about periods and my body and kind of what was happening. So I think, okay, but I don't think a lot of people I know can say that at that point they were in the same boat as me.
Yeah, because you took it upon yourself to self-educate yourself on what was going to happen.
Yeah, in grade 7, we had a sex ed day.
One day for the whole of sex ed.
Yeah, one day for all girls and boys to go through basically a sex ed course.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this needed parent signature, but because I, for some reason, thought that I was going to get into trouble with my mother for going to this, I forged her signature. Sorry, Mummy.
Is that because you didn't get the talk from her, that you felt maybe this is not or this is embarrassing, or it's not meant to be spoken of?
I think it was that. And it also was the fact that talking about anything that had to do with sex, periods, kissing, anything kind of like awkward or intimate or too personal was just something that was very like brushed over and ignored, and it was never acknowledged. So it always felt like you're not supposed to have these conversations, and so I didn't. But I had a need to like know what was going on. So I forged the signature and I attended the classes, and I was really disappointed in what we got from it.
We had also sex ed, but it was part of health as a subject, also in grade 7. It wasn't as informative as you'd think it would be, because from what I gathered, it was all about, don't have sex, you're going to die.
You're going to get AIDS and die.
You're going to get AIDS and die.
Yeah.
That's all sex ed was for us. Like, I remember briefly they put the anatomy there, but because a lot of parents didn't sign off on it being examinable, we didn't have to learn it. We were just given it, and it's like, for your information. And then the rest of it was like, you're going to get AIDS and die. And if you don't get AIDS, you're going to have some other horrible STD that's going to make your life hell.
That sounds about right. It is a bit of a flashback when you say that. I think it was pretty much like my experience as well. At the time, it did seem like, oh my gosh, so much is going to happen. You know, as a girl, you're going to get your period and it's going to happen every single month to you. And then one day you're going to just end up pregnant because you're going to be with a boy. But I didn't understand what be with a boy meant.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody ever explained. And maybe they didn't do it. Like, we can say a lot of things. Maybe the reason they didn't explain in detail as to what we would have liked to know now when we look back, maybe they didn't do it because they didn't think we could process that amount of information.
Possibly.
I do feel, though, that it should have been something that was consistently spoken of as you went through high school, because your puberty journey was still a journey as you progressed. It wasn't just like, okay, as a boy, your voice is broken and you're growing facial hair and hair everywhere else. Now you've hit puberty, it's all done. And as a girl, your breasts have developed, you get your period, so now you are well on track.
The misconception that we got, or at least I got from what we learned in school, was puberty is like a 1 week thing that happens and then it's done. It's not an ongoing, consistent change for a couple years.
I think probably one of the biggest gaps was the fact that parents relied on school to teach you these things, and schools relied on parents to be backing it up at home and having more of a personal conversation about it. And those are things that were not happening.
Yeah, definitely not in an Indian household.
Definitely not. I think parents also, like Indian parents specifically, for some reason felt very afraid, and I think still feel afraid to have those conversations, because they automatically assume it's going to lead to, pregnancy before marriage and teen pregnancy, and you like losing your virginity early and stuff like that. But I think what they don't understand is actually giving kids that information and having it be a progressive conversation constantly, not just a once-off thing, but having that open platform would have reduced a lot of that.
You don't think that comes from the fact that they probably got a very similar talk when they had to do it in school of, you're going to have sex and die? So that's...
I don't think they did it in school, though.
But I think they still had some sort of talk, which was given to them really badly. And because that, whatever they were told was related to sex, rather than your body changing, they think that giving us the talk would be a similar experience.
I mean, if I look at my mother, she didn't get to finish school. So I don't think that was part of the syllabus back then.
Okay.
The sex ed, I think, is a very progressive part of it. I don't know if anybody can rectify us on that, but from my understanding, it is a very progressive part of the syllabus, to have that kind of sex education as part of it. I think it could be stem from the fact that maybe they were left with assuming how babies were born or conceived and not having a full understanding unless you trusted your body and in that moment something happened. Like, your hormones take over and in that moment then, you sleep with someone and that's kind of what it is. Because it was also still very much of like the generation where you got married and then you slept with your husband the night you got married. And those things were checked. Because my mother...
You mean checked before marriage?
No, well, for my mother, I'm sure she'll share this as part of her story, but I know that the day after her wedding, the aunties were in the room and they were checking to make sure there was blood.
Oh, to make sure that it was consummated.
Yes.
Ah, okay.
And that, she was a virgin. And that was the understanding, and that's what it was. So I think the elder women that I know, the women who are part of our parents' generation, our mother's generation, it's not something that was spoken of, and for them, seeing somebody kiss was like a naughty scene.
Yeah.
In Bollywood movies, touching, like necking, or touching touching the woman's stomach or shoulder or whatever it is, that was all seen as intimacy.
Yeah, I mean, you still see it now in Bollywood movies. They kiss and then there's a baby.
Yeah,
who's
basically.
4 years old.
Or they go behind a tree and then, there's a baby. So I think that was where a lot of the confusion came from. And because our parents weren't equipped with the right tools, conversations, or even just the knowledge to be able to have those conversations with us, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I get that. It's traumatic exposure to puberty from way back whenever has to slowly get undone to future generations. It's not going to be someone clicks their fingers and all of a sudden it's given perfectly and the right way.
When you went through your sex ed at school, did you only learn about what happens to the boys, or did you learn about what girls go through as well and their changes?
So the way our course ran was, I think it was a couple months that we did sex ed, and the boys and girls were separated so that the girls would feel comfortable asking questions to a female teacher and the boys would feel comfortable asking questions to a male teacher, which I think was really great. I think the one disadvantage was that out of the months that we did sex ed, there was only like a month given to the other side where we could ask the female teacher now what happens to the girls. It's still a good thing to have that exposure, but I don't think it was enough because you get a very brief summary, and I don't think I personally realized what the girls were going through all the way through high school. I don't think I ever acknowledged the fact that some girls have their periods and that's why they're missing a day of school, and it was never a thing for me to pay attention to.
What about with your sisters?
Even with my sisters, I don't think I paid attention to when they got their period. Well, I knew when they first happened because there was a big ceremony and stuff, but I never acknowledged it after the fact where it was, oh, once a month this happens. And for you, with it only being like a day of learning, did you get to know what the opposite side had to deal with?
Not really. I think we just got a brief overview of what was going to happen to boys, and whoever was brave enough to ask questions asked. But if I look back at that day, I don't think anybody had many questions. From the girls who did already have their periods to the girls who were curious and didn't know what to expect. Nobody really felt super comfortable because it was such an overload of information that everybody was still really trying very hard to process. What I did though after that is I went to the library, as I did back then for everything, and I did some research and I tried to look up all the different terminology that we were given and everything that was told to us, and I tried to find out more that I could understand. I wasn't very successful in that, but what did change it for me and how I became quite comfortable with what was happening was there was a book sale at school, and I went through the books and I found something that was for teenagers, and it was on puberty. And I looked at the book and I really liked it, so I bought it and I took it home. I did hide it, though.
Mm-hmm.
It was never part of, like, top of my cupboard or whatever. It was always really, like, deep in my cupboard. For some reason, I was very scared that somebody was going to find it and I was going to get into trouble. I still don't understand what the rationale behind that was, but that was just the feeling. But the book was extremely helpful because it went through everything that we go through. It went through the cramping, the cravings, the mood swings, and it had a really good explanation of how the egg is getting released every month and why we're shedding that lining, and it's going to continue happening until you fall pregnant. And then it went through how do you fall pregnant, and that is through intercourse. But it also explained the male reproductive system and what happens, to them and what to expect, and, diagrams of what male reproductive organs look like. So it was a really realistic, helpful book because nothing was spoken of in sugar-coated terms. Everything was real medical proper terms that you could actually go and look up, and I had then the right questions to ask when I furthered my research.
I think that's like a really nice benefit that you had and prepared you pretty well for what was going to happen. And I think you touched on it just now, but a lot of us weren't ready for the sex ed talks when it happened. Not to say that it shouldn't happen at that age, because some were ready. And I know for me especially, because I was younger than everyone, when everyone was speaking about it in class and stuff like that, I would always just assume, okay, this is not for me because I'm not there yet. So you kind of switch off. And it is unfortunate because then you miss out on a lot of stuff. So I think that's where parents really need to be involved more with being aware of what's happening with their kids so they can give them the talks at the right time and continuously talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other thing I noticed about, that puberty time in high school was because we weren't given all the information more in high school. We weren't given information properly. I felt that puberty was very closely linked to having sex. Yes. So if you were sexually active, then you were doing puberty right. And yet those were two things that were totally separate, but did overlap. We just didn't understand it in those contexts of being totally separate or overlapping the way we should have at that time. Because I was in a school with a lot of teen pregnancies, but I'm 100% sure that if we were given the right information and we were told what we needed to do better, those would have been avoided.
Yeah, I agree, because it was the same in my school where we had a couple of matric babies, and I'm pretty sure it was out of the fact that most of the talks we got was AIDS. And then, for some kids, the workaround would be like, oh, we've been together, we've got tested, we both don't have AIDS, we can have unprotected sex. And that leads to the teenage pregnancies, because the focus was always on the STD side and the tabooness of sex rather than informing of everything.
Yeah, definitely. So knowing what you went through with puberty and the information that you got and the lack of information that you got, what will you be doing for your future kids? And I know it's not going to be as plain down and simple and following the plan, but what would your ideal way of having the talk be?
So I think the benefit for our children would be, something that both our mothers didn't have, which is we, as both parents, will be able to explain what's going on. And we both committed to giving the information correctly. And I know from my personal experience, it can be a long-lasting oops that you don't find out something, because I only very recently found out that there was something wrong because I wasn't given the information. And only recently did I correct the phimosis issue. Had I known earlier, maybe it would have been resolved earlier. So I think for us, being open enough to talk to our kids from a young age and explain that it's okay to talk to us when changes happen, and encourage them talking to us, and us just talking to them in general about life, would give them the opportunities that we didn't have.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also just encouraging asking questions and being a safe space to be able to ask questions that you may be embarrassed about, or repeat information that you may have heard somewhere to get clarification and to rather hear it from a trusted source. For me, I think the first thing that I think is really important is for us to be updated and educated when it comes to both genders. Because at this point, you only know what's going on with me and my productive health based on what I tell you. And as I'm doing the research and I'm still learning about my own cycle and how my body works and, all the things I wish I had known back then, so I was never put on the pill and I was able to rectify my issues much earlier on in life than I did. But you learning all of this as I'm learning it. I'm
Yes.
telling that to you. And as you're going through changes and learning things about, you and your reproductive health, I'm learning too. So I think my first point is definitely for us to make sure that we are both educated and updated on just the body and its health and how it works in all different ways, because nothing is really just that isolated.
Yeah, I agree.
And secondly, it would be to, have the open conversations about this is contraceptives, this is what sex is, and rather encourage things to be done in different ways. That the pill is not necessarily the answer to not falling pregnant. The pill is not there to treat just any sort of issue that you have. To be able to go through in detail and look at maybe, what's causing this, where's it stemming from, and handling it a bit better. To try and encourage, if we have sons, you don't force the girl to be the preventative measure. You can put on a condom. This is how you use it.
In addition to that, I think we'd want to get rid of the scare tactic.
Yeah.
Because I think that was a big focus for our generation, was the scare. You remember the scene from Mean Girls where the coach was like, you'll get chlamydia and die. So to get rid of that scare tactic, we just need to be honest about, yes, sex happens, sex is wonderful. Give them the correct information so they can make correct decisions.
Informed decisions.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just also trying to give them the talk at different stages. I don't think all the information is particularly relevant at every stage of life. I think the talk about your body and what is happening to you and how your body changes is a constant conversation that needs to happen with kids as they grow up. It's an evolving conversation.
Yeah. And I think what will help is you being very empathetic. You are aware of maturity. So what I don't want people to just assume is at 7 years old, this is the talk. And at 10 years old, this is the talk, because it changes from child to child. So I think you being very aware of that can help us as parents give the talk, the correct talk at the correct time.
And I think with that, I just hope that in this next generation or our generation of parents and aunties and uncles, that we provide that safe space and encourage the open conversations with future kids to make sure that we just break this chain of having this be something so taboo. It is natural, it happens, it's how your body works, and unless you talk about it, it's always going to be something that is going to be embarrassing to you.
Yeah, that was great. I actually think I'd like to come back to this topic at a later stage and just discuss more.
Definitely. I think we're going to speak at a later stage about our trying to conceive journey, and a lot of the information I wish we had been given throughout our years is going to come in on that episode.
Yeah, I think so. It's been an eye-opener for me lately, so I'm sure we can share a lot that's probably going to help a lot of people in their journey, if not to help them deal with conceiving and getting pregnant, but just dealing with the emotions.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for your candor, Mickey.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun again.
And yeah, I can't wait to actually talk more about this and the other taboo topics that we're strongly opinionated on. But until our next rendezvous, Shup, sweet, and aware. Lots of love.